Well, again, I want to welcome you back to our introductions to these different books that we're reading through the entire year. And again, my prayer is that these short introductions of historical context might be helpful. And so with each of your week's reading, I want to tell you what I want you to be looking for. We come to session 51. This is going to be Micah chapter 1 through Habakkuk chapter 3. And again, this week, you're going to be reading through three minor prophets, three books. You're going to read through Micah, Nahum, and Habakkuk. Now, beginning with the prophecy of Micah, again, he begins the book of, again, bringing God's retribution against Israel and Judah because of the corruption. And the corruption's at every level. He'll cover the corruption at the level of society, the rulers, the prophets, the priests, the judges, the businessmen, the landlords. They're all messing up and rebelling against God. And God's covenant promises was to be fulfilled by blessing them. But since they keep rebelling, finally, God's ultimate promise of bringing redemption and forgiveness and his compassion is going to be in the future kingdom that's going to be headed up by his son. At this time, all they know is it's the Messiah. So a judgment followed by forgiveness and restoration. In this book, what's really interesting about the book of Micah is the fact that it gives the birthplace of the coming Messiah prophetically. And you've heard the song, Little Town of Bethlehem. This is from where it comes. And the most remarkable thing is that why Bethlehem was such a small little town, it had to be identified by its general district of Ephrathah. And so hardly anybody knew much about this little town, but in Bethlehem, this would be where the Messiah would be born. What's interesting, the significance of Bethlehem is King David was born there. But then King David was born there, and when King David returned, he returned to Jerusalem, set his throne up, and that's when that became the city of David. But originally, the city of David was Bethlehem. Jesus is born in the very same little town that David was. And when Jesus returns, he's going to do just like David. He's going to return to Jerusalem and set up his kingdom in the city of David. And that's why it says that Jesus, the Messiah, is going to reign from the throne of David. Remember the Davidic covenant in 2 Samuel chapter 7, where God promised David, your kingdom will be forever and ever, because God's son, the Messiah, would be sitting on that throne, the throne of David. That's all prophesied here in the book of Micah. Now you're going to come to Nahum, and about 125 years after Nineveh repented with Jonah. So it's about 130 years after Jonah. Well, they fall back into their idolatry and their perversion. So this time, the people of Nineveh, and again, Nineveh was the capital of Assyria. But as God used Assyria to bring judgment on the northern kingdom, now Assyria, you're in trouble. You've fallen back. You had your chance. 130 years ago, I sent Jonah to give you the truth of my love and presence. And now your next generation and generation after that, you've just blown it off. So God's actually going to use Babylon to bring judgment upon Assyria. And that's why we were talking about how that goes through transition. Well, anyhow, by this time, through Nahum, you're going to see how God's going to bring judgment upon the capital of Assyria, Nineveh. Then you're going to go into Habakkuk, or some call it Habakkuk, but it's Habakkuk. And this is the very close to the very end of the kingdom of Judah. Remember, kingdom of Judah is the southern kingdom. And the northern kingdom's already been exiled, taken out over 100 plus years by Syria. And so we've got the remaining southern kingdom of Judah and Benjamin, and they've got some good kings, and so they're trying to honor God, but then they keep falling back into idolatry and into wickedness. And so Habakkuk is basically struggling with this because he's a prophet living at this time, and this is towards the end, just before the judgment of Babylon coming upon the southern kingdom. And it's kind of a funny book. The reason I'm smiling is he's quite a whiner. Because he'll first whine on God, why don't you bring judgment upon my people? Why don't you bring judgment on Judah? And he's kind of upset at God for not moving in judgment upon his own people. And God responds and says, well, I am going to bring judgment on your people. I'm going to use Babylon to do that. Well, then Habakkuk goes, what? They're worse than we are. Why would you go ahead and use Babylonians who are worse than we are to bring judgment upon your own people? And do you ever get a point where you don't fully understand why God does what he does? Remember, the book of Job is all about God's infinite mind trying to be understood by our finite little brains. And there's going to be spillage when you're trying to understand this and stuff it into that. And that spillage is called mystery. Of course, we don't always understand why God does what he does or how God thinks and how he's going to proceed. We don't know. And this is a perfect example. Habakkuk is really confused. But finally, at the end of Habakkuk, he ends up praising God and magnifying God's infinite wisdom, his power, and his purposes. It's a fun book. I think you'll enjoy that. Well, we'll pick this up next week with your next week's reading. God bless you, and God bless your reading.